Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Headstart Presents. I'm hoping it's running because I can't see myself. Oh, there we are. There I am. It's like being at the BBC. Anyway, look, great. Welcome. It's actually a reasonably sunny day, and to add a spin to it, it's my birthday today. So, and I'm really pleased to have some great guests on our panel today. Before we get into the meat of the subject and meet our guests, I just wanted to go through some key housekeeping rules. Otherwise, I'll get kicked from behind the scenes. So if you want to show this to somebody else, or indeed you want to review it back, it will be available on Twitter, on our Twitter account, headstart_.io. You'll be able to find the links there. Again, on LinkedIn, we're live streaming this right now on LinkedIn, Twitter, and on YouTube. So please do go to either of those places. The transcripts will also be available. And also, if you want to take part in today's poll, which we'll talk about in a minute, please visit learn.headstart.io/panel. And that's when you can join in with the poll. And also do take some time, if you can, after the show to visit our Learn Centre. And if you want to dive deeper into our content, you can. So today we wanted to, this is I think the fourth in a series of panels that we've done. And we've done them on a number of subjects, all largely around diversity in largely early talent, but in other areas. And we've covered a number of different things. And if you've seen any of our panels before, the last one we covered neurodiversity. And it's just been a logical conclusion to talk a little bit more about physical disability as a subject. And I've met some great people, as you'll meet the panel members later. But when I first started to think a little bit more about this, and we've been talking to people about the sort of the broad spectrum of diversity, and everybody will be aware that we've had a huge focus on ethnicity and gender for quite some time. In fact, I think gender diversity is probably one of the most visited subjects on our site in terms of content. But it's a little bit different when it comes to disability, and a little bit different again when it comes to physical disability versus neurodisabilities, if you can separate the two. And one of the things that strikes me is that we're ultimately uncomfortable with talking about it. So I wanted to bring together some people from within the realms of disability, and just kind of have a debate about it. Hopefully we'll get some good engagement from the audience. Please do ask questions, send them in to us. We will be tracking those and running them through them at the end. And also we'll run through our poll at some point in the conversation. So without further ado, I'd like to bring in our panel members. Hopefully, first of all, we've got Adil Ghani, who is a consultant at the Ability People. The Ability People is a business that it's a social enterprise, for-profit social enterprise that helps organizations create opportunities for disabled people, and helps organizations, I guess, with accessibility and consulting, and trying to understand any cultural challenges they may have in bringing disabled people into the workplace. We also have Liz Johnson with us, who is the managing director of the Ability People. We had a conversation last week. Liz, as you know, is a Paralympian, if you don't know already, very passionate person. We'll see, I'm sure, on the panel as we go along. And then we have Hardeep and Ted Rai. We have a little visitor in this new human world that we've got, extra spokesman, additional panel member. Hardeep is the co-founder and chief executive of a company called the Kaleidoscope Group, which hopes to try and create opportunities for startup founders with disability and get people with disabilities into work, or even reskill them. So what I'll do is, I think what I'd like to do first is get each of you to do a brief intro yourself, and also just a brief overview of what brought you to today, where you are today in terms of this topic. So why don't we kick off with this to start with?
Thought you were going to start with a deal then. Yeah, so as you'd like, I was fortunate enough to be one of the lucky ones who had a career path that I was interested in available to me in terms of being a Paralympian. But the reality is not every person without a disability wants to go to the Olympics and be an athlete, and therefore that it's fair to say the same of people with disabilities. Like not everyone wants to be a Paralympian, as I'm sure Adil will tell you when you get to him. But I think I did realise that I was lucky to have learned a lot of lessons through sport. We talk about that a lot with athletes having transferable skills. But for me, it was how I saw the sporting world change and the way that it treated people with disabilities, the way that it embraced them, and actually the experience that you have as an athlete with a disability now compared to maybe 25 years ago. And I think I always had an interest in business. My degree was in business management. I thought I would be an accountant one day. But I actually realized when I was retiring that I had a bigger purpose. And that sounds a bit cheesy sometimes, but actually I was given a platform and a voice to advocate for those who haven't got that. And so in creating the Ability People, my primary aim was to normalize difference within the workplace, to create meaningful employment opportunities. So that hopefully, I don't think it will happen in my lifetime, but hopefully one day we get to a point where we don't have to distinguish between different types of disability or different types of people. We just accept difference for what it is and who it makes us, and we end up with the right people for the right roles wherever that is in society and in the workplace. So in an ideal world, like I said, we wouldn't have to be having separate webinars about certain types of disability, because actually you create an equitable experience for all and everyone can just be the best versions of themselves. So ultimately that's how the Ability People came about, because what I realized is one of the biggest barriers to this, and you've alluded to the fact that sometimes people are fearful about talking about it or engaging in it, but is the lack of exposure to it, the lack of exposure to difference. So actually at the Ability People, we confront it head on, but we do it in a very human way, and it revolves around the interaction to ensure that people actually realize that fundamentally, at the end of the day, everyone's human. And so we shouldn't have to make special allowances for anybody or adapt things for people. We should create a world where everyone has the opportunity to use what they need to do to be successful.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Liz. Let's go to Adil next then, as he's part of your organization.
Cool. Yeah. So my name is Adil Ghani and I'm a consultant at the Ability People. I live with a disability called muscular dystrophy, which basically means that with time, the muscles in my body get weaker and weaker. And I had a life expectancy of 18. I'm 26 now, so smashed it.
Wow.
But my background was really, I attended a special needs school, which I was fortunate enough that on the same grounds of the special needs school, there was a mainstream school as well. So my academics were accessed, I accessed my academics at the mainstream school, but I attended the special needs school for all my other needs. And what I realized very quickly is that, I was exposed to a variety of differences, right? From learning difficulties, neurodiversities, all the way to incredibly severe physical disabilities. And one thing I realized that environment gave me was the ability to see that everyone can achieve, but we do it at different levels. And so the way I sort of saw my role, having the skills to be able to advocate, is that I would sort of try and champion this cause of disability is not what you think it is. And when leaving school, like many people with disabilities, I think I didn't really have a clear path in life. It was like dropping off the edge of a cliff. And I decided I would go to college and do some courses just to keep my mind active. But I never really pursued this idea of work, because even going to the special needs school like that, there was nobody who I could look up to, and there was no examples in the media or anywhere at that time of somebody in a similar situation to myself in full-time employment. So my assumption was it just doesn't happen for people like me. So I decided I wouldn't. And I was lucky enough that I'd built somewhat of a network, and I pursued some voluntary opportunities. And through that, I met Liz, and then when Liz decided on this crazy adventure that she wanted to go on, she said, "Do you want to come along?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." Because for me, the way the ability people, the way we function internally, is a real example to how organizations can function. And I think the difference in thought was that we want to work with you, right? We don't care about whatever else comes along with you. We'll deal with that. We'll find a way. And we have, I have a PA who goes with me to meetings with clients and things. And, just because I'm in a wheelchair and I have, kind of severe physical disability, doesn't mean that I can't attend meetings and can't sit in boardrooms and all this. I do it in my own way. And I think that for me was really powerful. And that's what I enjoy, why I enjoy working with TAP.
Yeah, inspiring, Dil. Thank you very much.
No worries.
And last but not least, Hardeep and Ted.
Thank you very much. Hi, Gareth. And he'll pop his head up whenever he wants, by the way. Yeah. So I'll try and keep him down as long as I can. I really echo a lot of what Liz and Adil have said already in terms of, looking at people for who they are and not necessarily the background they bring with them. But my background in terms of what I've done and how I've got to where I am is that I started in financial services in the city. I worked for hedge funds. I had a very salubrious career, to be honest, up until the age of 36. So I was really enjoying life. And then I think I had 3 what I call life-changing events that have formulated who I am. The first one was the tsunami, the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004. I was on holiday in Thailand in Phuket, and we just were having a brilliant time, and all of a sudden you wake up one morning and there's a wall of water coming into your, literally into your hotel. And that was the most petrifying experience of my life, because, you just see your life flash before you, you're running away from the water, you're running past people that are literally dying, and you're thinking to yourself, how can I save myself and save those people, whilst realizing at the same time that you can't do that, right? And that was from my own mental health after that event. That was the first thing that was a real shock to my system. So, 36 years of what you probably call normality, and then all of a sudden that was the first thing that really hit me. And then the second thing that hit me was my little angel over here, Ishan. When he was born in 2006, there was a last-minute birthing complication, and that led to him being severely disabled. He had 17 minutes of a lack of oxygen to the brain. And, this is one of those situations in life where, you talk about whether you acquire a disability or whether your life just changes within a split second. It was one of those moments. I was told in the hospital, you're going to hear your son cry any minute now. And I never heard that cry. I never heard that cry, right? And then it was a case of 7 days of, is he going to live? Is he going to die? And then if he does live, word to the hospital, he's going to be a vegetable all his life. So for me, that sort of rebooting my life, restarting, repurposing, everything I thought my life was going to be suddenly just stopped, right? And I had to really sort of rethink things. And again, for my own mental health, that next few years was extremely challenging, very dark. But, coming to terms with what had happened. And actually, funnily enough, when I think about it now, faith and trying to understand why me, all of these different things contributed to building the strength along the way in terms of, who I am today. And today, Ishan's 14 years old, and he's the inspiration behind Kaleidoscope. So he was my second life-changing event. And my third one, for all those Dragon's Den fans that are listening, is that I had the privilege of working with James Caan for a couple of years. And that was amazing. He really taught me about entrepreneurship. So back in 2014, I met Shane Bratby, and he told me that people with disabilities, they really struggle to start their own businesses. And this gave me a really good idea, Gareth, because I thought, okay, well, actually, I've got all this investment experience, startup experience, and knowledge. Why don't we bring this into the disability world and give people with disabilities the chance to start their own businesses? And therein was the birth of Kaleidoscope Investment. So even though with the Kaleidoscope Group today, we help individuals that are disabled to find jobs, our jewel in the crown really, and where we started, was in the world of entrepreneurship. So that was really how Kaleidoscope was born until today, and the story behind it, Gareth.
Wow. Well, thank you, folks. Thank you for incredible stories, really. So look, let's kick off. Again, just looking at a bit of a backdrop, as I alluded to before, doing some research on the unemployment rates, and it's quite scary to see the unemployment rates among the people with disability going up, both here and in the US. It's now at, I think, 8.4%, which has gone up from 6.9 in the UK. Employment rates 29% lower for people who are disabled, and 47% of the disabled population are either in economically inactive or unemployed. And it's a very similar picture in the States. I think it's 12.6% unemployment in the US, and 17.9% total employed rate, which isn't very high. And against that backdrop, when I start talking to people about it, there's as I mentioned before, there's almost like it's not. People are much more happy talking about neurodiversity. They're a lot less happy. Sometimes it's difficult to have a conversation more around physical disability. When I was talking to people, it's kind of reluctant, but I guess it's because the conversation is not happening in their workplace, which is something we'll discuss. And perhaps for some reason, maybe we can talk about that today, that it is more difficult. I also, in part, the conversations that I had, was talking to somebody about it, and they were a consultant, and they were talking about they felt that the lot of their work they did with organizations was around neurodiversity, and that organizations have the challenge in neurodiversity and not in physical disabilities, and therefore the problems don't lie there for the organizations, which left me thinking, yeah, but what about the people with the disability? How do they feel about it? Do they feel actually it's not a challenge? And I doubt that. Oh, the poll's just picking up. So good time to ask a question. Over the past year, how often has disability inclusion been mentioned in your workplace? Let us know. So everybody's been talking about diversity over the last year. We'd really like to know whether disability, physical disability particularly, has been on that conversational agenda, because I think it's important. So we've got this kind of backdrop of, it kind of doesn't get a huge amount of airtime. There seems to be a general reluctance. Why do you think it's such a challenge? Liz, let's go to you first. Why is it such a challenge for organizations, do you think, to either talk about it or even address it? Because it would seem that the statistics show that we're not making much progress.
Yeah, and I think, like, at the Ability People, what we base everything around is this idea of the 3 E's, and increasing education, exposure, and empathy to disability and difference. And historically, what people associate with a physical impairment is that people are less capable. The barrier to that is that actually people don't get enough exposure to difference and disability. So then that perception hasn't changed. And so people don't realize they're doing it, but their brain short circuits to a point where they make the decision for that individual based on their experience and their assumption or what they understand disability to mean. And I think, as I said in my introduction, we want to get to a point where we're not distinguishing between certain types of disability or even certain types of people, that we're understanding that inclusion means let's create a world where people have opportunity to access what they need to be successful. But it's true that you've alluded to it, that things become topical or fashionable, and that's where the attention goes. And I think one other thing with physical impairment is it's the one difference that exists on the planet that nobody is immune to. Anybody can acquire a disability at any time. And I think so there's a level of discomfort there, because people don't want to they don't realize that that's what's holding them back. But it's this idea that they don't really want to know how difficult it is, because it's so unjust and so imbalanced that it would horrify them and it would upset them, and they don't know how to make it better. So actually it's that whole saying, ignorance is bliss. And again, I think disability and physical impairment specifically is that one area where people, they don't realize that that's the thought process they have. Like it's just a short circuit. It's an auto direction that you go in, but it is largely the driver of why people behave in the way that they do. Because like this, and like one example that we use regularly is this idea that people like tippy-toe around the situation as if it's the elephant in the room, but actually people with disabilities know that they have them. Like they didn't wake up that morning and suddenly acquire their impairment. Don't get me wrong, people do wake up of a morning and acquire an impairment that they didn't have yesterday. But the reality is, if that is the case, they're likely not to be in the workplace, or they're likely not to be in the supermarket. They're likely to be at the doctor's or on the way to hospital or in their house hoping it passes. So it's this idea, we need to move away from this idea that physical disability or any difference makes you less worthy and less capable, because that's simply not true. And when you say it out loud, people are like, well, of course I don't think that. And you're like, no, but your behavior suggests otherwise. Your behavior suggests that you do think that, because you're amazed by the fact that Adil can get to a meeting on time, or you're amazed by the fact that I co-founded an organization. So like, actually, whilst you don't want me to think that, and you want to think that you don't think that, actually currently that is exactly what you think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. It's crazy, isn't it? And it's just one of those, I think you've described it really well. It's a really interesting way to look at it. Physical disability can come on at any time for anybody through accident or so on. And I guess if that happens to certain people, that could be an interesting contrast for them, right? In terms of, what they might or might not be able to do going forward. So yeah, perhaps there is that fear factor, but it certainly does seem to sort of manifest itself in that way in the workplace. Hardeep, you have an element in your business around helping entrepreneurs to start. And we've previously had conversations about the disabled pound and also the market size and people are incredibly capable. Getting a job is really tough. I would imagine starting a business and getting investment is even harder. So I don't know how's that. I saw your video recently, by the way. If anybody hasn't seen Hardeep's one of his recent posts on LinkedIn, please go and watch the video, because it was a straight from the heart 15 minutes, well worth a watch. So thank you for sharing that with us. But how do things contrast, or are there similarities when it comes to trying to support people who want to be entrepreneurs and start businesses?
I think the first thing I would say, Gareth, about the world of disability in general is that unless you have been touched by it or affected by it, you're just not gonna understand it. It doesn't matter how hard you try, it's not gonna resonate with you. Okay, so I think a lot of those people that fall into the world of sort of, they're not linked to disability, are exactly as Liz said. I couldn't agree with her more. They have this unconscious bias, right, towards people with disabilities. They don't even know they're doing it. That's a funny thing. And that's why a lot of the time I don't necessarily blame people, because they're not conscious that they're doing it. And we also live in a world where role models are really important. Okay. And I think that, for the world of entrepreneurship, people talk about disabled entrepreneurs not having much, not having a track record. There's not many people you could see that have exited businesses that are disabled, and I get that all the time. Yet, on the flip side of it, you have the founder of IKEA that was disabled. You had Sir Henry Ford that was disabled. You have Richard Branson that's disabled. You have Elon Musk that came out 2 weeks ago speaking about his disability. We buy products and services from people with disabilities that are massive success stories already, without even realizing it. And I think, Gareth, the thing for me is that, I've met in the last 6 years, 1,200 plus disabled people by myself, 1,200, right, individually, from 65 different types of different disabilities and 28 different countries. So we've really had, on the entrepreneur side, a real influx from all over the world. And every single person, every single one of them has got a really good idea. Every single one of them has got passion. Resilience is inbuilt in a person with disability. They've got drive, they've got motivation. And to your point about the size of the marketplace, with recent studies that have been done, The purple pound in the UK, which is the spending power of disabled people and their families, is £274 billion a year, right?
Okay.
That's in the UK. Globally, Gareth, that's $13 trillion globally, right? So what a lot of companies need to start thinking about is they need to start directing their products and their services to the disabled community, because guess what? They've actually got a lot of money, right? And they need products and services. You know, I was just talking to somebody the other day about the breadth of ideas that we have heard over the last 5 or 6 years. It's a captive market. You don't even need to provide your services to a non-disabled community because you've got a ready-made market there. But you're right. The biggest challenge that disabled entrepreneurs face is convincing investors to invest, in inverted commas, into them, rather than feel sorry for them because of the charity angle or the competition angle or the grant angle. And that's what Kaleidoscope Investments is all about, is to try and help to look at the entrepreneur, support their disability, but then help them to build their ideas out.
Yeah, super. It's incredible, isn't it? Like you say, there's a whole market there that's not being tapped. But then, you know, we see that in investment anyway, you know, beyond any standard, what looks like a normal white male entrepreneur, right? You know, I saw this morning that somebody has raised a significant funds to invest in, you know, Black founders, which is fantastic to see. But it's quite telling that we're seeing that as unusual. And, you know, it's quite disappointing, really, that the investment market's not moving on as quickly as we'd like. Adil, you're a consultant. You know, at one point when you finished your education, you kind of felt that you were going to fall off a cliff. I mean, my heart, you know, I felt that when you said that. You know, when you think about the opportunities that others have, and they kind of just assume, like I did, that, you know, I'll just either go and do another course and then at some point I'll find a job and, you know, I'll have my life mapped out, kind of thing. That's quite a thing to do, and quite an achievement to be where you are now. And, you know, question in my mind is, if you can be a senior consultant in the, you know, the ability people, then you could be a senior consultant in Capgemini, Accenture. And in fact, if there's anybody from the professional services organizations, you know, watching this stream right now, this is something to really take in. But in terms of your work, Adil, what is your experience when you're going in and talking to organizations and trying to, you know, to shift their limited beliefs, as I call it?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, the approach we take is very different. And I think we have to be different because one of the things we realize is that in the UK, for the last 20 or 30 odd years, the disability employment gap has near enough stayed the same. So that means that, you know, initiatives like Access to Work and others, Disability Confident, are great, but clearly they're missing out on a key piece of information, and that's why the disability gap, in my opinion, hasn't closed. So what we're about is much more about taking this holistic approach, about giving exposure. But having said that, we've come up against, you know, I think people struggle to let go of what they've been doing for so long. So, you know, we've gone into recruitment process and we've said, you know, this candidate may need extra time or an alternative test, right, rather than the standard one you do. And the feedback we always get is, well, you know, we have our standard set of adjustments. This is beyond that. We don't feel like it would be fair. And that really, I think, stems from this idea of we're doing the minimum we need to. Why should we do any more? Right? And legally, that's all we're required to do. But I think we need to go above and beyond and look at, actually, at the end of the day, if you want the best people working for you, you need to allow them through your recruitment process to show their skills. And if somebody is going to show their skills by, I don't know, bringing in an example of their work they've done previously, or rather than, you know, someone's applying for an IT position and you're asking them about what they're going to do on a Friday afternoon when their manager comes to them and says, we've got 3 tasks for you to do, prioritize. The reality is, in any situation like that, you have a discussion and you come to an agreement with your manager about what you're going to do first. So in my eyes, those kinds of questions, whilst, yes, they have their place, at the end of the day, the assessment process should see whether someone has the capability, right, or the ability to do a job, right? And as long as they can do that job, how they do it doesn't matter, really. You know, if I use voice recognition to write my reports, or whether I type them, at the end of the day, if the report gets to you in the right time frame and with the right deadline, does it matter? You know, it doesn't. So I think it requires a fundamental shift in our thinking, really. Yeah.
Interesting. You know, that whole phrase. It's hard to believe actually someone would actually say, you know, we're doing the minimum required. You know,
well, it's more that they say, oh, we followed the guidelines, or we followed the legislation. And I think so. It's not that because again, you have to remember that people's exposure in this area is quite limited, and therefore they're being led by somebody else. And so if they read the legislation, they're going to assume that that legislation is based on what's necessary, but actually it isn't. And so sometimes it's not through, like you say, Gareth, you want to always believe that people mean to do the right thing. But if they're limited in their knowledge in that area, they're going to go to the resources, they're going to follow procedures and processes and legislations that they believe are guiding them to the right thing. But like Adil said, it's only when you start to question that, or someone falls outside of the norm or the recognized disability, that the issue lies, because there's a lot of people who don't have an official diagnosis, or maybe their impairment affects them in a way but not enough to be officially recognized. Well, it doesn't mean that they don't still require a different way of expressing themselves. And so that's, I guess, where that idea of legislation and process and guidelines only go so far. And I think Adil made the really good point that we've been talking about this for decades, you know, and the Disability Discrimination Act has been in place for over 25 years, yet nothing's really changed. And actually, why is that? And again, it's not for the want of trying, because if you go to organizations, they have got all the accreditation that they require, and they have met the legislation that needs, but that's not what it's about, is it? It's about appreciating an individual and the difference that they have and how they impact you compared to somebody else. Because the other common misconception is that you need to provide charity, or you need to provide additional support or extra assistance. Well, no, if you create an environment for that individual to be independent and go about it in a way that they're capable of, then they probably don't need you at all, because as Hardeep said, they are resilient, they are motivated, they are resourceful, they are adaptable, and they've got all the soft skills that you ever look for in an employee, but you don't ever ask them about those. You don't, and sometimes they don't actually appreciate they've got them, because it's day-to-day life. And actually, people go, "What do you do differently?" Well, I don't know, because I've never functioned typically, so I don't know what I do different. Like my friends will, if I'm ever filling in a form, and I'll go, "Oh yeah, I cook typically, don't I?" They're like, "No, Liz, you balance stuff on your head, and you've got all these scars up your hand from where you burn yourself." But because it's my normal, I don't know what I'm comparing it to. So we need to move away from this idea of people having to justify why they need an adjustment or why they need a different opportunity. And we need to create a world where there are options. And then if people who are going for roles just pick the option that best suits them. And actually then there's no differentiation. There's no potential for positive or negative discrimination, because you're just judging people on their capability and what they are able to do. And I think that's often the biggest downfall in this area, is like we're looking, and the way the world's created is that we have to label people in order to get them the support that they need. But actually, which is why we need to, I'm not saying get rid of legislation, absolutely, it's completely necessary. But also we need to start prioritizing this. It isn't a choice. It's not an add-on. Yes, there is social impact, but it shouldn't come under just your CSR. This is a responsibility, because actually at present, individuals who are different, or specifically those that have disabilities, are not getting an equitable experience of the job marketplace, of the workplace once they are in it. And actually, and this sounds very dramatic, and it's actually a bit depressing, but life generally, and like the question you asked, Deal, the reality is when he goes in to a meeting for the first time, he meets someone for the first time, I would say 99 times out of 100, we leave and they are blown away by him. And don't get me wrong, he is amazing at his job. Like, he is amazing at what he does. And so they deserve to be blown away by what he delivers. But more often than not, they're blown away because they had zero expectation of his capability. And that was okay in the 1800s when nobody understood what disability was. That's and technology didn't exist. And there wasn't the support and the assistance and the equipment available to enable somebody. But it's 2021, people. So, like, why is it that? And like I said, he's super capable. But the reality, we're not naive. We're not stupid. We know that if it wasn't for the fact that I had a Paralympic gold medal, we would not be doing what we're doing, because, as Hardeep alluded to, nobody would back you. Nobody, people would think you're crazy. In fact, people did think I was crazy when I said I'm going to create a team where people can work from wherever they want, whenever they want. And people used to be like, yeah, but how do you know they're going to do it? Well, they're going to do it because they've got a vested interest, and they're working towards the common goal of something they're passionate about. But it's also enabling them to have an independent life where they fund their own lifestyle and they don't become reliant on everybody else.
And I think
that stereotype.
What speaks further as well, when Liz says crazy idea, even I thought Liz was a bit mad, but that was because but that was because of my own problems, in the sense that when I was in school, like Hardeep says, there was no real role models of people with disabilities. So I thought, Liz, you're doing this, right? And it sounds great. Is it going to work, kind of thing? Because people didn't have exposure. I didn't have exposure, right? And then I very quickly learned actually can work, and actually it works very well. But I think this is where the media as well, we see two extremes. We see the Paralympians, or, who very inspiring, very capable individuals, or we see children in need, where we see young people who sometimes are in positions where they're unable to help themselves. So we don't see the middle ground. And, someone like myself who needs two personal assistants just to be able to function in the world, so to speak, and go to meetings, I think if, just knowing that for people opens their minds, right? And it's not down to organizations. I don't ever say to Liz, oh, you need to help me to get to X meeting place on time, because that's not Liz's job. Right? Liz's job is to say, Adil, can you get there, right, for this time? And then I either say yes or no. And if I say yes, then it's down to me to get there. And I use my two personal assistants, and I have an adapted car, and I get there on time. And that's my responsibility. So I think sometimes organizations also seem like they seem like it's going to be a burden, or more of a burden than what, it's not a burden at all, kind of thing.
Can I add to that, Gareth, if you don't mind? I think Liz and Adil, you've made some fascinating points. And I think, Adil, the first thing I want to say about what you've just said is that I have a team sort of 28, 29 people, some part-time, some full-time, some shareholders, total mixed abilities, right? And they all have their own way and method of working. So the first thing I've changed in the way that I run this business is it's not about the hours. It's not about what time you start. It's not about what time you finish. It's about the output, right? It's about setting targets, setting goals. What do you want that individual to achieve? And let them do it in their own time. And you're constantly learning about this, right? Because with leaders, you don't think like that ordinarily. You just think 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 or whatever it is, right? Or you think value is equated to the number of hours that you work. My own partner can go offline for 3 or 4 days, let alone 3 or 4 hours, right? But then when he comes back, he's like online for literally 96 hours. I have other people in my team that it takes them 2 or 3 hours to get ready. And a deal, like you said, if I tell him to be at a meeting at 9 o'clock, he's there, right? On the dot. In fact, 8:58. He hasn't told me that he's had to get up at 5:30. He hasn't made me feel that way. And I think this is what a lot of employers need to start realizing, is that actually whatever that disabled person goes through in their own lives, they typically don't bring that into the workplace, right? Yes, there are reasonable adjustments that need to be played. Yes, we have a fantastic access to work scheme that the government have to support people with disabilities, but you don't need to feel that you are taking on their problems and their burdens necessarily. But you do have to have a support infrastructure in place to be able to support them, as you do with any other employee, right? Especially when we're in the world of COVID and mental health. I think that's really important. And the other point, Gareth, I would like to make here is that in my short experience of the recruitment world, because if you think my entrepreneurship experience over the last 7 years is my real expertise, in the recruitment world that I've been in for the last year and a half, I have noticed a change in employers wanting to have the conversation around recruitment. Okay, I've witnessed that myself. I've been in meetings, they're talking about recruitment. Yes, they are worried about how that works. Yes, there's a lot of fear. Yes, they are worried about being sued because of the protective characteristics that people with disabilities have from the very beginning. They are worried about things like that. But I've noticed that if they feel that there are organizations that can hold their hand and help them through it, that there is a willingness to actually begin that change. And I think the Valuable 500 initiative and Caroline Casey is a very good example of that, right? What they've achieved in the last 2 years is absolutely magnificent, right? And now we've got 13 CEOs from major companies that are saying, let's really put disability onto the board agenda. So I feel that there is a change. I think we've got a long way to go. And and again, my view is like Liz's, we shouldn't have to exist as organizations. But the reality is for quite a while we will, because there's a mindset shift that has to happen. But I want to commend, in case any of those organizations are listening, I do want to commend, because I feel that there is an intention to make a change. More of us need to be patient and help and guide and steer. And I think guys like Adil and guys like other people in my team will have the opportunities that they then deserve.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? When going back to the legislation, which and the approach. I guess legislation is easy to put your hand on, isn't it? Accessibility, right? Well, we need to create the opportunity for someone to enter the building or do all those things. They're very concrete. It's a very definable list. It's very easy for things to do. Whereas the others, going beyond that, thinking about the cultural issues, thinking about, to your point, Adil, not trying to take on the burden of this individual having their individual life. I don't know, maybe just people just assume that, when you bring someone in the business with physical disabilities, I don't know, is that they feel this burden? I really don't know.
The thing is, more often than not, if organizations took the time to actually speak to the person and say, look, this is what we typically do, is it going to work for you? And if the person says no, ask them, what would, or do you have any ideas of what we could be doing? More often than not, people with disabilities, like Liz and Hardeep have alluded to, are the best problem solvers in the world, because they do it in their daily lives on a daily basis. And
that is so true.
The reality is, even in our team and all the exposure and team we've got, like Liz, Liz will say to me, we need to do this. Have you got any ideas about how we can do it? Right. And I'll be like, yeah, if it was me, I'd do it like this, because, I would want more time or whatever, or, I think we need to look at things like this and things. So I think there's people need to have a bit of bravery and sort of smash the norm, if you like, and start looking to the individuals themselves for guidance. But also at the same time, if that individual, if it's their first job or they're a graduate or it's their first role in the working world and they don't know what they need, it's okay to take a bit of time to discover that and say, okay, well, we typically do it like this. Have a go. Let's see. We'll identify problem areas. You do the same, and we'll work together to overcome them. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. And at the end of the day, we do that with our other employees on a variety of things. You know, if somebody's a new mum or a new parent, they might say, can we have a discussion about changing of hours and things? And we do that. So in the same way, let's open the conversation up, right? And, you know, in our opinion, it's okay to have those conversations. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And I think actually people with disabilities would welcome it. And also I think organizations, like Hardeep says, the people that are doing things well really need to shout about it, right? They can't be embarrassed, because the reality is in the disabled community, word spreads fast. Right, so if organization X is doing something really well, I'm going to tell the 50 people in my network, right? There'll be parents, carers, all sorts of people who know, and they'll say to their young people, yeah, go to them first. And then do you know what happens? Organization X gets the pick of the lot, right? Yeah. And so that's where you want to be really, really active. You know?
Yeah, and I think
it's a really, really good point.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add to bring what Adil's saying, and even maybe answer the question that's appeared. I think the point Adil's making there is it needs to be human focused. Like if you're a good leader, most people that are in their roles are good leaders in what they do, whether they've got a leadership role or whether they've just got a position in a team that people go to because they are autonomous at what they do and they're brilliant at it, right? So why do we change our thought process and leave that when we're talking to somebody who's got a disability? We abandon our principles that have got us to where we are because we're trying to complicate it, and we see something that's not there, or we like you alluded to right at the beginning, Gareth, we're fearful about what we do. But actually, that's why, like I said, TAP, what we do is it's about the human interaction. It's about exposing people to difference, to realize that fundamentally we're all human and we all have different preferences and we all have different needs, regardless of whether we've got a protected characteristic or that we're in a particular situation. And I think that links into the question from the audience that was any suggestions if someone has a physical disability and is autistic. Again, talk to them, find out what they need to be successful, find out what they want to be comfortable that is going to enable them best. And I think one example of where legislation sometimes guides people but isn't quite there is completely because you alluded it to, Gareth, sometimes it helps with setting up accessibility of an environment or a certain standard that we need to meet, and like completely not workplace related but completely building related. When I bought my house, I bought it off plan just because we were buying a new build. And when we did our walk around with the builder, the home demo, whatever it's called, he said to me, when we walked in through the front door, he said to me, there was a piece of wood that was like inside the front door and they hadn't laid the floor. And he said, do you want me to leave this piece of wood or take it up? And I said, well, what is it for? And he said, oh, it's a requirement that we have to put in to make every property wheelchair accessible. And I said, but there's 2 steps into my front door and there's 2 steps into my back door. So at no point.
That is so nonsensical,
So
isn't
the
it?
wheelchair might be able to make it in through the door, but you tell me how the wheelchair is going to get to the point where it gets to use this fancy little piece of wood. And he was like, oh yeah, good point. And then he went, do you want me to make it a ramp? Because, you know, he obviously assumed I had loads of friends that use wheelchairs because obviously I have a disability and therefore I must naturally. But the point, like, that for me highlights why sometimes, yes, legislation is extremely important and process helps, but it also highlights that unless you have authentic inclusion in the planning stage of everything that you do and all potential users represented. I'm not saying you have to have 1 million people on your consultancy board while you're doing it, but like people's needs need to be represented in anything you do. And I think if, like, as an organization, if this pandemic, if we've learned anything, it's actually that we were very much geared towards a certain type of individual. And actually, those that adapted best are, as Hardeep alluded to, those that are constantly adapting in their everyday life. If you think about it, those that have actually gone, actually, this working from home is okay, or I don't like it, but it's allowed me to do X, Y, and Z. So accessibility isn't just about a physical thing, and it shouldn't be determined by someone who doesn't have that perspective. Like it's not about what we think someone needs, it's about asking them what we need. So like back to that question, like I said, to go full circle, if a person's got a physical disability and is autistic, well then you have to address both elements of that. So what do you need to help you, and how do we make you feel comfortable? Like, we don't abandon our principles as individuals interacting with other humans just because the person in front of us is not someone that we can relate to.
It's incredible, isn't it, when you think about sorry, Hardeep, do you want to speak?
I was gonna add to that. This is something that I learned. First of all, I learned this when I worked with James, and then I witnessed this through some disabled people that I interacted with. So the first thing I learned is that in the world that we're in today, everybody's got an asset, right? And that asset is your story. It's your story, right? There's only one you. So when people talk about a USP and what's so different and it's very competitive, you need to learn to tell your story, first of all, right? And there's a phrase that I heard from somebody that I worked with for a while called disability smart. And just so that a lot of people that may not be disabled will use their assets to their benefit, people that are disabled should do the same thing. And that's exactly what I see a lot of the disabled community around me actually doing, right? So whether you have a physical disability, whether you're autistic, whether you have cerebral palsy, whatever it is you have, you've got to really understand what your talent is and what your skill is, right? Just think of it like that. What is your talent and what is your skill? And how are you going to sell yourself to that organization? Because I promise you, if you package that in the right way, then whatever your level of disability is, whether it's physical or whether it's hidden, that organization will be able to see that. And I think that's where we want to get to. We want to get organizations to look through a disability, much like we're doing with entrepreneurs, right? From my point of view, when I'm listening to an idea, I'm not looking at the person that is telling me that idea. Of course, I'm understanding what their support needs are and how we need to support them, but I'm looking at the value and the quality of their idea and how they've presented it, right? That's the important thing. It's not them. And in the same way, I would implore everyone with a disability to remember one thing, right? You have an asset. You know, the good old tennis player, Martina Navratilova, she's got a fantastic quote that says, everyone is good at something. Everyone is good at something, right? It's just finding out what you're good at and then being able to present that to the people that you're talking to. I think that's a very important point to make, if I may, Gareth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we're getting 53 minutes in. I can't believe it. It feels like 10. So probably need to draw some conclusions. It's fascinating when hearing you all speak, and Liz at the beginning, earlier in the stage, and I think in conversations I've had with both of you, previous to this notion of actually moving away from, categories and groups and everything else, and thinking about we all on a spectrum as varies will have different needs to adjust to, right? Just as human beings. And the point you made about people thinking you were crazy, Liz, having a business where people could be based anywhere and work there to their best ability wherever they want it. We had exactly the same thing when we went to a distributed model back in 2019, so a year before COVID. And that was the narrative. Although it had been done and it was being done really, I still got a lot of people saying, well, this only suits small technical companies. This only, this won't work in my backyard. And how do you know they're working and stuff like that? Which, really, when you think about it, we've created this very archaic, backward structure of work. And we're trying to, for years, it hasn't made sense to me. We've been trying to shoehorn people into this, and people who don't fit very well don't get in. And I think that's a real problem, because and it's what it shows is that it's this construct of work and construct of the framework around it that we also need to change. I mean, yeah, absolutely, Hardeep. We want individuals to put their best foot forward We want them to be able to leverage to their best abilities. And it seems the way we've constructed work has really only been around, a certain population and a demographic. It makes it much harder to access when we have that old traditional model. Whereas, in our business, and, when you have a business that people can work from anywhere and work in the way that suits them, find their ideal working pattern and everything else, it makes things so much easier. Just even taking out a physical commute every day and requiring presence. People are talking about that, like we must get back to work, we must get back to the office. But I know plenty of people who are, able-bodied, not disabled. Thankfully, that they don't have any challenges, mental or physical, to getting into work, and they do not want to go to work in that pattern again because they've realised how constraining it is and impacting on their ability to do the job. So I think it's fascinating that we're really kind of hopefully seeing a bit of a turning point in how we structure an organisation and how we structure the notion of work that allows everybody to just be a human being. I think that's the thing. We've got to get back to being a human being. I'm a human being. I've got these set of skills, and by the way, I'll need these adjustments to be able to allow me to fulfill, my own talent. Fascinating. Right, I'm going to read the poll results out before I get a final word from everybody. So effectively, the question being, how often has physical disability, come up in the conversation around diversity in the last 12 months? The results are 7% constantly, 36% regularly, but 50% rarely, and 7% not at all. So well over half, 57%, really aren't having the conversation, which it's kind of what we expect, I guess, but not ideal. We definitely need to shift that dial. And, I guess we can continue to explore why that is. But look, final thing, we got 3 minutes and counting left. A word from all three of you, really, in terms of, if you could consolidate all of the advice that you could give into, one or two things, brief things that we recommend that people do to get that conversation going, to start the ball rolling in an organisation where it isn't, what would they be? Hardeep, why don't you go first?
Okay, so the first thing I would say to the individuals is be daring, be brave, be confident. Don't change your career path because you think you need to, because of the job that you want to get. Think about what you really want and create your story. So I would say to the individuals, be brave and be courageous, and don't be afraid to go out there and look for what you need and want to do, especially in a post-COVID world, because people are thinking differently now. And to organizations, I would congratulate those that are having an open mind. I would encourage many more organizations to look at people with disabilities in the recruitment process, employ more people with disabilities, give them the opportunity, and I promise you'll be very, very pleasantly surprised.
Great. Hardeep?
Yeah, so just echoing what Hardeep has said, I think for people with disabilities, look around, right? The world has changed, and I think there are role models out there. Admittedly, they're tough to find, but I think recognize your own skill set, recognize and analyze your day-to-day. What do you do day-to-day? And you can speak to, family members or friends around you and compare the differences, and you'll be able to highlight then those skills. I think for organizations, I'd say be brave. It's all right to be a trendsetter, right? And start something new and be innovative with your recruitment processes and all this. Don't feel like you have to stick with what your industry is doing. The way industries move forward and the way the world develops is by those trendsetters and innovators. So be brave and be empathetic. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dale. Liz, over to you for the final word.
I think I would just say appreciate that difference can be a strength, and that asking for help or gaining further education or seeking additional knowledge or support, and this is for both, like organizations and people with disabilities, is not weakness. Like if we buy a new piece of gardening equipment and we don't know how to use it, we think nothing about going online and finding out how to use it, and that's all it is. Like it's not just because you don't know something, there's a gap in your knowledge. It's not it's not okay to ask for that help. Go seek that support, go seek that help. And above everything else, just check yourself and be aware that your way isn't the only way, because I think fundamentally that's a big sticking point in this, is that we judge on what we can see or what we interpret, and actually find out how someone might do something if it isn't like you. Because similar to what Hardeep said, you'll be blown away and surprised by the answers and the capabilities of individuals. So your way isn't the only way, and give people the chance to show you what they're capable of.
Fantastic. Right, well, thank you guys. I just can't believe that's the quickest hour and 58 seconds that I think I've ever had. It's been really great having you on, and there's so much more to say. But look, anybody watching from any organization, please do get in touch with these guys, because they're at the sort of the leading edge and really positioning and a really great position to help. And anybody who may be watching this or does get to see it, who does have a disability, again, get in touch. There's so much value these folks can add, I think, to everybody's life. So great. Well, look, that just allows me to wrap it up. Thank you, Liz and Hardeep and Adil, for coming along and participating in the session. And Ted, of course. Thanks, Ted, for his valuable contribution during the show. Again, if you want to watch this back, please do be on our YouTube channel, and we'll be pushing it out through our social connections on LinkedIn and Twitter. And if you've got any questions, want to get in contact, please do directly or through me, and I can put you in touch with the guys. But for now, it just remains for me to say thank you very much, everybody, for watching. Have a great day, have a great bank holiday weekend, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.